the winter in Chicago is harsh. Outside the window, snow was falling silently, and a gray sky covered the city. Margaret Williams sat by the window, gently stroking her swollen belly, her gaze distant. As a 6-month pregnant woman, her expression mixed joy with some unspoken anxiety. "Baby, Mommy is looking forward to meeting you," she whispered softly. For Margaret, who had struggled to conceive, this pregnancy was a miracle she had waited for a long time. Though successful as an accountant, what she wanted most was to have a family. Looking at the wedding photo displayed on the living room shelf, she saw the smiling face of her husband, James. He was a brilliant scientist working in the research and development department of a pharmaceutical company. With high cheekbones, slightly longer black hair, and deep green eyes that conveyed intelligence, James had captured Margaret's heart from the moment she first met him. A University of Chicago alumni reunion. That's where they met. James approached Margaret, who was drinking champagne alone in a corner of the venue. "It's been a while, Margaret. Do you remember? We sat next to each other in organic chemistry class at college." To be honest, she didn't clearly remember him. However, their conversation flowed naturally afterward. Margaret was quickly captivated by James's intellectual conversation and the gentle smile he occasionally showed. "Your smile makes me forget any failed experiment," James said during their first date, walking along the lakeshore after visiting the Metropolitan Museum of Art. At that moment, Margaret had to admit she had fallen in love with him. They dated for 2 years. Those days passed in the blink of an eye. James moved Margaret with a romantic proposal by Lake Michigan. Despite the weather forecast predicting rain, the clouds cleared, and the moonlight shone on them as James got down on one knee. "Margaret, I want to walk through all of my life with you. Will you marry me?" It was clear to Margaret herself that the answer was yes. After marriage, they purchased a small house in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. The house had enough rooms, with space set aside for when they had children in the future. However, conceiving a child wasn't as easy as they thought. After many failures, Margaret was starting to consider fertility treatments when a miracle happened. She had conceived naturally. "James, we're going to have a baby," Margaret told her husband in a trembling voice after confirming the test results that night. James embraced her and shed tears of joy. At least, that's what Margaret thought. However, as time passed, Margaret noticed her husband's attitude had gradually changed. James, who had been loving and treasured their time together on weekends, recently made excuses about being busy with work and came home late more often. "A new project has started. The development of a groundbreaking drug," James explained one night. His eyes seemed to be looking somewhere distant as they sat across from each other at the dinner table. Margaret respected his work and tried to understand. After all, she knew how important it was for James to succeed in the scientific world. But Margaret asked her husband to accompany her to regular prenatal checkups. James always declined, citing work reasons. "It's fine. Just call me if there's any problem," James would say dismissively. Going to checkups alone had become completely routine for Margaret. It would be a lie to say she didn't feel lonely, but she was patient and tried to understand her husband's busy schedule. Then one day, Margaret accidentally saw a message from an unknown woman on her husband's cell phone. The message reading, "Last night was amazing," caused a pain like her chest was being squeezed. The fear that her husband might be betraying her, a 6-month pregnant woman, crossed her mind, but she had no proof. The morning sunlight gently illuminated Margaret's bedroom through the gaps in the curtains. She slowly opened her eyes and noticed her husband wasn't beside her. This had become common lately. James had been leaving for work early in the morning more frequently. Looking back, when the pregnancy was first discovered, James and Margaret were an ideal couple. James started painting the baby room on weekends, carefully painting white cloud patterns on pale yellow walls. When Margaret's morning sickness was severe, he researched and prepared special anti-nausea recipes. "Our child will be someone special," James said one day while thinking of girl names. With my scientific knowledge and your economic sense, she'll be a Nobel Prize-level genius. Margaret smiled as she watched James's passionate expression. His eyes were shining, filled with hope for their future. Remembering the night they listed several name candidates like Clara and Lily still warms her heart. Friends called them the perfect couple, and Margaret truly believed it. However, around the 4th month of pregnancy, something began to change. She increasingly found messages saying, "We'll be late," on the refrigerator memo pad, and the time they spent having breakfast together on weekends gradually decreased. James's work hours gradually extended, and he began talking about a new project. He never discussed the specifics, but repeatedly said it was innovative research. "If this research succeeds, our future will be even better," James promised. He said this with a tired face from across the dining table. There were dark circles under his eyes. Margaret believed him. Since their marriage, he had never lied to her. At least, that's what she thought. During lunch with her friend Susan, Margaret decided to open up about her concerns. "James has been acting strange lately. He won't come to the checkups, and I found messages from an unknown woman on his phone." Susan, a nurse, gently held Margaret's hand and encouraged her, saying, "Men can have complicated feelings about pregnancy. Especially with the first child. Maybe he's overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. But he was really happy. When we found out about the pregnancy, he cried," Margaret said. That was probably genuine emotion. But as reality approaches, fear can grow too. "I know because I've seen many couples at the hospital." Though somewhat reassured by Susan's words, as Margaret made her way home, anxiety still swirled in her head. Was her husband simply avoiding his anxiety about the pregnancy? Or was there a more serious problem? When she got home, she found an unfamiliar receipt on the kitchen counter. Margaret picked it up. It was from La Maison Bluey, an expensive restaurant she didn't know. The amount was over $200. The date was last Wednesday night, when James had said he would be working late with colleagues from the company. Margaret sat down in a chair. Her head was starting to hurt. The seed of doubt had already been planted, but this receipt seemed to make it real. She tried to calm herself by taking a deep breath. It might just be a business dinner. It could be a work meeting, she told herself. However, that night, Margaret began to feel physical changes. Despite being 6 months pregnant, the early symptoms like nausea and dizziness began to appear again. She rushed to the bathroom several times, and each time she washed her face, she felt her face growing paler in the mirror. One morning, after vomiting in the toilet, Margaret was surprised by how pale her face looked in the mirror. Her hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Despite being pregnant, she had lost weight. She instinctively felt this was different from normal pregnancy symptoms. "Are you okay?" A voice suddenly came from behind. Margaret turned around, startled. James was standing at the door. For a moment, a flash of concern seemed to appear in his eyes. "Yes, just pregnancy symptoms," Margaret answered. She forced a smile, trying not to show her distress. "I made your morning coffee. A special blend. It should make you feel better," James said as he left. There was kindness in his words, but his eyes felt cold. After that, he started preparing coffee for Margaret every morning. Even pregnant women can have decaffeinated coffee. "This should help you feel better," he would say, always handing her a cup of coffee before she went out. Strangely, she began feeling worse after drinking the coffee. The dizziness got worse, sometimes making it difficult even to stand. "Maybe you should consult a doctor," James said one morning. His voice showed concern, but his eyes seemed to be hiding something. "I have a checkup tomorrow. I'll talk to them about it. Will you come with me?" Margaret asked hopefully. James hesitated for a moment before answering, I'm sorry. Tomorrow is an important experiment day. I can't miss it. I understand, Margaret replied quietly. She was used to it by now. She looked out the window, trying not to show her disappointment. It had started to rain, as if the sky reflected her feelings. Finally, the day of the next checkup arrived. As usual, Margaret headed to the hospital alone. Again today, James declined to accompany her, saying he had a deadline for an important project. On her way to the hospital, Margaret saw a message from her husband on her cell phone. Let me know about the checkup results. I'll be late today. Margaret sighed. The two of them once shared everything and enthusiastically discussed future plans. Now she couldn't help but feel a distance between them. She turned on the radio in the car. As gentle melodies filled the car, Margaret found herself thinking about James's research. He hadn't explained in detail what he was researching at the pharmaceutical company. He said it was because of a confidentiality agreement, but he used to be more open. What had changed? The scenery outside the window changed, and the hospital building came into view. Margaret parked her car in the parking lot, took a deep breath, and then headed to the obstetrics waiting room with familiar steps. White walls, gentle pastel-colored chairs, baby photos hung on the walls. Though she had visited many times, today she felt strangely nervous. Good morning, Mrs. Williams, Maria at the reception desk greeted her with a gentle smile. Upon seeing Margaret's face, Maria's expression clouded. Are you okay? You don't look well. I'm just a little tired. Don't worry, Margaret smiled back. After receiving her examination card, Margaret sat in a corner of the waiting room. There were other pregnant women around her. A woman talking happily with her husband, a woman with a child on her knee seemingly preparing for the next child. Everyone seemed happier than her. After a while, Nurse Judy called her name. Margaret Williams, please come this way. Arriving at the hospital alone as usual, Nurse Judy spoke kindly to Margaret. The doctor is running a little late, so let's get you prepared first, she said, and preparations for the ultrasound began. Margaret changed into an examination gown and lay on the examination table. Looking up at the ceiling, she pondered the abnormal changes in her body. Judy looked at Margaret's chart and her face seemed to cloud slightly, but she quickly regained her smile. How have you been feeling lately? Judy asked. To be honest, not very well. My morning sickness should have subsided, but the nausea and dizziness have gotten worse again. Judy was about to say something when the door opened, and Dr. Anderson, Margaret's attending physician, came in. The woman doctor in her 50s usually greeted patients with a warm smile, but today she had a serious expression. Hello, Margaret. How are you feeling? The doctor asked with a serious look. Margaret explained in detail about her recent health problems. The nausea, dizziness, occasional severe abdominal pain. And the weight loss. When did the symptoms start? The doctor continued asking detailed questions and began taking notes. About a month ago, I think. At first, I thought it was normal pregnancy symptoms, but they've been getting worse. Have you done anything different? Changes in diet, or started taking new medications? Nothing special. Oh, James has started making me a special decaffeinated coffee every morning. He's concerned about my health. Dr. Anderson frowned for a moment. She whispered something to Judy, and the nurse hurried out of the room. Margaret, I'd like to add a blood test to today's ultrasound examination. Is there a problem? Margaret's voice was mixed with anxiety. It's just a precaution. Don't worry, the doctor said, but her eyes seemed to be considering something serious. The ultrasound examination began, and Dr. Anderson was intently watching the monitor. Usually, she would explain things like, see, here's the baby's hand, but today there was silence. The baby's image displayed on the screen. There was certainly a small life there, but something felt different. Eventually, the doctor said in a heavy tone, "Your baby, this is, well." She stumbled over her words. "What is it? Is there a problem?" Margaret asked, trembling with fear. She felt a pain like her chest was being squeezed. The doctor took a deep breath and said, "There are abnormalities in the fetus's development. Also, there are issues with the placenta. This is not a condition seen in normal pregnancies." Margaret's world stopped. There was a ringing in her ears, and she felt like the room was spinning. "What do you mean?" Margaret's voice was trembling. "There are concerning aspects in your blood test results as well. Are you taking any medications? Prescription or over-the-counter, anything at all?" "No, I haven't taken anything because I'm pregnant. I've avoided everything that might harm the baby." Dr. Anderson pulled up a chair and sat next to Margaret. Her expression had grown more serious. "Actually, specific substances were detected in your blood. These are drugs that could induce miscarriage. To be precise, traces of a drug called mifepristone." Margaret froze. "But I haven't taken such medication." Her voice was almost a cry. The doctor explained carefully, choosing her words, "This substance is not naturally produced in the body. It's possible someone has intentionally given it to you." For a moment, the air in the room felt frozen. The image of her husband appeared in Margaret's mind. His job at a pharmaceutical company, his recent strange behavior, the morning coffee, and the suspicion of infidelity, everything connected. "You mentioned that you drink coffee your husband makes for you every morning." Margaret nodded slowly. Her hands were shaking, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "My husband." Fear and anger that couldn't be put into words enveloped Margaret. "I can't believe it." Margaret finally managed to say. "James would, to me, to our baby." The doctor took her hand and said, "You should report this to the police. This is a criminal act. Serious harm to you and your baby." Margaret took out her cell phone with trembling hands and called Susan. "Help me. I'm at the hospital." Her voice was broken with sobs. "By the way, is the baby?" Margaret fearfully asked. "The baby is alive at this point. However, there are signs of developmental delays, and long-term effects are a concern. We need to start detailed examinations and appropriate treatment right away." Many thoughts were swirling in Margaret's head. Anger, sadness, fear, and above all, the pain of betrayal. How could someone she had spent years with and trusted most try to harm her and their baby? Why did he do such a thing? What happened to him? "Your safety is the priority," Dr. Anderson said. "Stay at the hospital today for further tests and treatment. And we'll report this matter to the police. We need to gather evidence." Margaret nodded, though she was still in shock. In her mind, the events of the past few months ran like a slideshow. James's changes, his late returns, the cell phone message, the receipt, and the special coffee every morning. "What should I do?" Margaret asked in a small voice. "First, don't go back home. Stay in a safe place. A friend's or family member's house would be good." Margaret was accompanied by Dr. Anderson and Judy until Susan arrived at the hospital. Her mind was confused, and her body was exhausted, but she had made one clear decision. After leaving the hospital, Margaret never returned home. She disappeared, leaving everything behind. To protect her life and her babies. And to uncover the truth behind this betrayal. Susan's apartment was far from the Chicago bustle that Margaret knew. Outside the window stretched a lake, and only the sound of quiet waves hitting the shore reached the room. Margaret sat on the sofa with a blanket over her knees, holding a warm cup of chamomile tea with both hands. Susan was on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in a low voice. "The police have detained him," Susan announced when she returned. Margaret nodded silently. 3 days had passed since the discovery. 3 days ago, her life had completely collapsed. Margaret had taken refuge at Susan's home. She filed a police report, and medical records from the hospital were submitted as evidence. From their home, her husband's laptop, coffee beans, and used filters were seized as evidence. James was being questioned by the police but denied all charges. "He wasn't trying to kill me, the baby," Margaret said to Susan, crying. Tests had shown that the fetus was still alive but had serious developmental issues. The doctors promised to do their best, but no one could predict future problems. Margaret's cell phone kept ringing continuously. It was James calling. Susan looked at her and said, "Answer it. The police can record the conversation. You might be able to get something out of him." Margaret answered the phone with trembling hands. "Why?" That was the only word that came from her mouth. On the other end of the phone, James exhaled deeply. "Margaret, I've been worried about where you are. Why haven't you come home?" His voice sounded concerned, but behind it, she felt something else was hidden. "You should know," Margaret answered coldly. "You know everything that happened at the hospital." "What are you talking about?" "I haven't heard anything about the checkup results." "Is there a problem with the baby?" "It's what you did." Margaret's voice was shaking with anger. "Do you know what effect the substance you mixed into my coffee every morning has had on me and the baby?" A moment of silence. "Margaret, calm down. I don't understand what you're saying." "The police are gathering evidence. From your lab too. It's only a matter of time before everything comes to light." Silence again. "It's a misunderstanding, Margaret. I was only thinking of you and the baby." Margaret hung up. She couldn't bear to hear the voice of her husband, who lied so easily. As the police investigation progressed, Margaret was exhausted both mentally and physically. One day, Susan brought important information. "I heard from a colleague of James's company that he has a mistress. A woman named Caitlin, and she's pregnant too." Margaret's world crumbled. Was he trying to have two families? "No, apparently he didn't want a child with you. Only with Caitlin." Knowing this fact, Margaret reflected on their married life. James's kindness and love in the beginning, and his joy when the pregnancy was discovered. Was it all an act? Or did his feelings change along the way? A week later, with evidence mounting, James finally admitted his crime. He had been mixing drugs that induced miscarriage into Margaret's coffee over a long period. According to his confession, he had a child from an affair with Caitlin, and he considered the child with Margaret as, in the way, both financially and mentally. In the police interrogation room, Margaret faced her ex-husband. He looked haggard, with no trace of the confident scientist he once was. "Why didn't you talk to me directly? You could have asked for a divorce," Margaret asked. Her voice was calm, but inside, anger and sadness were swirling. James answered with cold eyes, "You were the perfect wife. If I divorced, my reputation would be ruined. My position at the company would be in jeopardy. But if you, unfortunately, miscarried, no one would blame me." Margaret was speechless at that cold calculation. The man she had loved wasn't there. Instead, there was a cruel person who would do anything for his own benefit. "You tried to kill our baby," Margaret said quietly. "You, whom I trusted. Understand, Margaret. Caitlin she's someone who understands my research. We work in the same field and made wonderful discoveries together. She would support my career. So I was in the way of your career. That's not it. But if a child was born, you would become more dependent on me. My time and freedom would be taken away." Margaret stood up. "Goodbye, James. I never want to see you again." At the trial, James received a heavy sentence. For intentionally harming a fetus and poisoning his wife, he was sentenced to 15 years. Newspapers reported the case with headlines like, "Devil Scientist Attempts to Poison His Own Child," and James's career completely collapsed. His research partner, Caitlin, was also investigated for possible complicity, but she claimed she didn't know. After the trial ended, Margaret went to the hospital alone to check on the baby's condition. Fortunately, thanks to the discovery of the drug administration and appropriate treatment, the fetus's condition had stabilized. The doctor said, "We can't say completely healthy, but there's a high possibility the baby will be born." "Is there a possibility that this child will have some disability?" Margaret asked fearfully. "Unfortunately, that possibility exists. Developmental disorders or learning disabilities are possible, but there's a lot we won't know until after birth." Margaret made her decision. "I will have this child and raise it alone. This child has done nothing wrong." Dr. Anderson smiled gently. "You will be a strong mother. We will support you with all our strength." On the way home, Margaret placed her hands on her stomach in the car and whispered softly, "It's okay, baby. I won't let anyone hurt you anymore. Mommy will protect you." 3 months later, Margaret gave birth to a baby girl. The small cry echoing in the hospital delivery room announced the beginning of a new life. The baby, named Lily, had some developmental disorders as expected, but to Margaret, she was the most beautiful miracle in the world. "You are my miracle," Margaret whispered as she held her daughter's tiny hand. "No matter what difficulties come, we will overcome them." Susan attended the birth and supported Margaret with all her might. "She looks just like you. She has the same strength," Susan said, stroking Lily's soft cheek. When Lily was about 3 years old, Margaret began to consider moving to San Diego, where there was excellent special needs support. Lily had delays in language development and motor function disabilities but had grown into a bright and curious child. Her smile was the light that illuminated Margaret's heart. Margaret had financial security from the compensation awarded in James's trial and the division of his assets, but there were too many painful memories in Chicago. "Should I start a new life in a new place?" she consulted with Susan. "You can build a wonderful life anywhere," Susan encouraged her. A new environment might be good for Lily too. The new life in San Diego brought peace to Margaret and Lily. A small house surrounded by a mild climate and gentle sea breezes. Margaret continued her work as an accountant remotely, and Lily began attending a school with a special support program. Her strength and determination became a beacon of hope for mothers in similar situations. "Looking at you, I think we can move forward too," one of the mothers in the support group said to Margaret. It became a major turning point for her. Margaret established a support group for parents of children with disabilities, and the activity gradually expanded. Her experience gave hope to parents facing similar difficulties. One day, when Lily was 5 years old, at a gathering of Margaret's support group, she met a man. Robert was the father of twins with developmental disabilities and had lost his wife in an accident. The two gradually became close, and their children also became friends. "Lily is a special child," Robert said one day, watching Lily play with other children in the park. "You're special too, Margaret. The strength that has brought you through these difficulties makes you shine." Margaret smiled. She felt the door that had been closed in her heart for a long time beginning to open a little. She couldn't completely forget the pain of the past, but she could have hope for the future. "Maybe I was fortunate," Margaret said quietly. "Without that experience, I wouldn't have known Lily's special strength, or this new life." Before them stretched a road, uncertain yet filled with hope. As Margaret embraced Lily, she thought, true love is not something that hurts others, but something that protects, nurtures, and helps them grow. She now knows its real meaning.